we will be discussing on the topic of access to justice and accountability, especially in the field of alternative care. First of all, some housekeeping matters. I will ask all the speakers to speak slowly so that the interpretation can be done properly. If you have questions, don't hesitate to use the button question and answer at any time. During the session, the question will be brought up in the conversation after the presentation. There will be a language, and there is a language interpretation in all sessions. So to access this, use the Zoom toolbar at the bottom of the screen and click interpretation and or closed captation to make your choice of format and language, including English speaker. Sign interpreters will be visible side by side with the speaker. There is an international sign in all plenary session and some working group, which is the case in this working group. Concerning safeguarding and etiquette, the good practice for Q&A box is to address the question to the panelists as a group and not at one specific person. The session will be recorded. Panelists may rename themselves and use an alias instead. It's reminded to the children who follow this workshop not to use their names, but rather their first name or pseudonym. It goes without saying, but we ask everyone to be respectful and know that any question that is abusive will be removed. And we also ask you not to send private message to children and or young speaker. If you want to follow up after an intervention, you will receive an email, the email of Amy Draghe, who can put you in touch with the supporting organization in case we need. So finally, we have a graphic facilitator with us, and he will help us to have a visual of what will be exchanged. So now it's my great pleasure to introduce my co-host of this session, Munashe, who is from Canada, and is one of the members of the CAT group. So that's the Children Advisory Team, who is with us now, and we can see him on the screen. Hello, Munashe. I hope I pronounce your name quite well. I will let you introduce yourself, but I'm very happy to be with you in this session and to be able to work together in this session. So you will introduce yourself, but you will also introduce the main question that we will have to deal with during this session. So Munashe, it's over to you.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be part of the day of general discussion. And yeah, I just want to thank everyone involved. Hello, my name is Benashi, and I come from Canada. I have been a member of the DGD Children's Advisory Team since March 2020. As I have albinism, it has given me a perspective that not many people have. I want to raise my voice and speak for children and young people like me and face the same challenges as me. I work closely with LUMOS and the ICSS. I am so excited to be with you through Zoom today. For today's working group, we will be covering the topic of access to justice and accountability for children and young people in alternative care and their families and adults who are in care. For myself, I think it is so important to talk about this topic because we all know the systems have never been perfect. As we reflect on the past 2 years of COVID, I hope we can find a new way to help children and young people in alternative care to better their experience. Thank you so much. As we go into today's speaking topic, we will be discussing the questions of what are the lessons learned from national inquiries and redress schemes addressing historic violations of rights faced by children in alternative care that must be addressed as part of care reform efforts, and how? How do we address structural discrimination and racism to lead to overrepresentation of children in extreme poverty, indigenous children, and children of color, and children with LGBTQ plus I children in alternative care? What do we know works to ensure states' responsibility and accountability in addressing children's rights violation in context of alternative care, both in the use and provision? And what are positive examples? What are we getting from the states in assuring that we held accountable? And what must governments do to achieve this? Thank you so much. I look forward to hearing all the great speakers we have in front of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Munashe, and thank you for your intervention. Indeed, the system have never been perfect, and it's important, as you are stating, that we try to find new ways also to learn from the past. Don't hesitate to ask for the floor anytime and to add your views on what will be discussed. As a very short introduction, of course, I think that we all agree that access to justice and accountability is extremely important for all children. It has been identified by the SDGs, so the Sustainable Development Goals, especially the 16.3, as necessary to ensure the implementation of all children's rights. For most of the children, it's a difficulty to reach justice, to access to justice, and there are a lot of obstacles in their ways. I will not enter in all those obstacles because most of you know them. But when it comes to a child who is in institution and who is experiencing a separation from the family, of course, the difficulties are even more important. And for instance, when we talk about accountability, we can see that there is a lack of control, supervision, a lack of understanding what is quality care, and probably the implementation of the rights that are provided by the law in place is really too low and too weak. Also, there is a lack of monitoring. When it comes to access to justice, first, most of the children do not or didn't have access to justice in the first place when accessing to an alternative care setting and to protect their rights, and they were not able even to challenge the decision of placement in care. And they don't have a proper access to remedies and adequate, accessible, independent complaint mechanism. All this together makes it a challenge to be in care and to have a way out and possibility to reach out to support and to people who can inform you about your rights and also give you the support you need. So it's important that we understand more about the difficulties and obstacles, but to also understand what remedies are in place, and more important, to look at the future and see what we can do and what kind of lesson we can learn to implement and improve the situation for the future. So it's my great pleasure now to give the floor to different speakers. We will have 3 speakers who are a young person who have a specific experience to share with us. And then we will have 5 discussants who are more professional in this field and can certainly also share their own experience. It's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, is Mrs. Sinet Chan, who is a member of the board of the Children's Trust in Cambodia. And what is very interesting concerning her is that she is also a script writer, and she won some awards for her work. So Ms. Sinet Chan, you have the word, please. It's over to you.
My name is Sinet Chan. I am from Cambodia. I am an orphanage survivor, an advocate for global care reform, and the founder of Khmer Angka Caregiver Network, and a director on the board of Cambodia Children Trust. Today, I wish to speak to the topic of access to justice and accountability for children and young people in alternative care, their families and adults who growing up in care. I speak for myself and on behalf of the other caregivers from around the world who had similar experience to mine. I was born in a very poor family. After both of my parents died from HIV, my sibling and I were separated from our older brother and sent to live in an orphanage funded by foreigners from around the world. I thought living in orphanage might give us a good opportunity, but when I arrived at the orphanage, I began to feel very unsafe. The other children and I were badly neglected, and we never had enough to eat. This was despite regular visits from foreigners who would make generous donations. Mostly we were at leftover food sent to us from nearby Pagoda. Someday we had to find our own food, and we would catch mice and fish from surrounding rice fields. We were forced to work every morning and evening doing hard manual labor on the land owned by the orphanage director. We were working like slaves. When I was younger, I just thought of these activities as a means of survival, but now I realize it was a form of child trafficking and exploitation, including for profit. The orphanage director also abused us, and I was raped for many years. The orphanage director threatened to kill me if I ever told anyone. I lived in fear, and I was scared all the time. Many caregivers like myself have lived through exploitation, abuse, neglect, and have been used for profit in care. While our stories are deeply emotional, one thing us caregivers share is that we don't share our story for pity. We want change, we want justice. Between 2005 to 2010, the number of orphanages in Cambodia increased by more than 75%. And the number of children living in orphanages nearly doubled. Nearly half of these were unregistered and admitting children unlawfully. Many were exploiting children for profit, and some were trafficking children. Despite having law that criminalize all these acts, many perpetrators went unpunished and continue to run unregistered orphanages. In 2017, I was invited to give expert testimony at the inquiry into establishing a modern slavery act in Australia. Australia examined orphanage trafficking as a form of modern slavery and its link to orphanage tourism and funding. I see this as a one positive step toward access to justice for children and young people who have been exploited in orphanages, but more action must be taken. State must have offense that criminalize operating unregistered orphanages, admitting children unlawfully exploited children in care, including for profit. State should ban orphanage tourism. State must end impunity for offenders who traffic, abuse, and exploit children in orphanage and for operator of unregistered orphanage. Caregiver should have access to free legal service and support to access justice, including for all cases where their rights have been violated and abuse or exploiting have occurred. Donor countries need to regulate funding of overseas orphanages and orphanage tourism to prevent trafficking and exploited for profit. The support of orphanage have created a thriving industry in which children were separated from their families and subjected to terrible abuse and neglect, as I was, being used as a commodity to generating funding. This support must have to be directed towards supporting family and family-based care. Children around the world have the right to grow up knowing the love and belonging of the family within their community and to being protected from all forms of exploitation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sinette, for having had the courage to share your experience and to point out all those so important issues, feeling unsafe in a place where you should be protected, living an experience as slave, the abuse that you went through, all the threats that you receive. But even though you had this extremely difficult experience, you want change, you want justice, and you know that this is a fight that will be extremely important for all children who are still going through this many thanks for your contribution, and be sure that all the ones who are listening to you and who are attending this workshop are committed to work very hardly on this issue. So thank you for this exchange. I will introduce the second speaker now, Marcel Lemnarou. He presents himself as a self-advocate. He comes from Moldova, and he will also give a bit more information about himself, and then we will listen to his experience and views. So Marcel, I hope that you are with us now and that you can take the floor. Is Marcel with us? Marcel Lemnarou? I have no information about whether he's with us or no, or not. If it's not the case, maybe I will give the floor to the third speaker, and if Marcel appears again, we will go back to him, but then I will give the floor to Megan Moffat, who is Vice Chair of a national advocacy charity named Who Cares from Scotland. So Megan, it's your turn. We are ready to listen to you. Thank you for being with us.
Great, thank you so much. I'm really excited to be able to be here. So my name is Megan, I'm 23. I have care experience and I'm the Deputy Chair of Who Cares Scotland. I want to give you some context on the Scottish landscape for alternative care. We're very lucky to have a First Minister who's really interested in alternative care. We've already done measures like leaving the age you can stay in care till from 18 to 21. We've recently had an independent care review, which was heavily influenced by the voice of children and young people. We're incorporating the UNCRC into domestic law, and we recently passed a law that expects social workers to keep brothers and sisters together. But at the same time, change is slow. The Scottish Child Abuse Inquiry is taking evidence up to 2014, the year it was set up. It was supposed to exist for 4 years, but it's still taking evidence as people continue to come forward. Sorry, I'm just seeing messages. We talk about abuse and rights violations in care like they're historic, but they're not. Article 9 says that we can only justify separating children from their families if it is in the child's best interests. And 85% of referrals to alternative care in Scotland are made on care and protection grounds, yet there is sustained and substantial evidence that the public authority is failing in its duty to safeguard those children it takes parental responsibility for. We know the lifelong impact of this. We know that it results in a life without support or love, but instead a stream of professional strangers to help us navigate the world. We know how this impacts on people's mental health, on their self-esteem, their education, their employment. We know that it leaves them with no safety net and that their sense of self is oppressed. The moves and changes that we go through are compounded until you don't feel like you fit into society anymore. And we know that toxic stress undermines life chances. You can swap the statistics for care experienced people anywhere in the world and the picture is the same. I want to look beyond the statistics to the people, because people in care are not intrinsically broken, the system is. The care system is costly, both in terms of money and in lives. We know anecdotally that care experienced people are more likely to die younger. I personally have been to far too many funerals of friends my own age when I should have been celebrating their birthdays or engagements instead. Scotland recently led the first International Day of Remembrance for care experienced people this year. And many of those no longer here to speak for themselves. It's time we stop talking about it and took real drastic action to do better. So what works? Who Cares Scotland are an advocacy charity that work to ensure state responsibility and accountability through relationship-based and independent advocacy. We're independent from care providers and public bodies, which means that our sole priority is to ensure Article 12 is upheld for children, to support them to have their views heard and to access justice and accountability in a child-friendly way without solicitors or courts or processes for adults designed by adults. The top issues our advocates face at the moment are being able to see their family, having a say in legal decisions, and issues with their education. But these top issues have been the same for the last 40 years across Scotland. Care is ever changing, but the results aren't. Lessons learned from national inquiries are the same as they were decades ago. The time to do something radical was 40 years ago when the first inquiry told us what was happening. So now is the time to stop talking about it and make things happen for people. So what can governments do? I say the first thing is to use the money better. It doesn't matter if there's a rule saying that brothers and sisters should be kept together if there are no loving homes to go to. Article 4 puts a responsibility on governments to use all available resources to uphold rights. £942 million is spent on the care system in Scotland each year, and another 200 million for universal services that are meeting unmet needs of people who have experience of alternative care. All the money in the world isn't getting this right at the moment. If alternative care was pitched as a business idea, you'd be told it was going to fail. Nobody would invest. It makes economic sense to invest in upstream policies and actually fix the alternative care that we can provide to children, preventing the lifelong impact costs met by homelessness services, criminal justice, mental health services, and most importantly, by the care experienced adults themselves. We need to offer lifelong support for all care experienced people to be able to have accountability. We will have people much older in life who will still be dealing with the impact of the trauma of their own experience of alternative care. All the new policies and all the new actions are for young people, which is great, but what about the people who grew up in these orphanages where we're now discovering mass graves? They're potentially facing going back into state care due to old age and re-traumatization. Parents are for life, and that should include government parents. We need to better protect future generations and make sure that independent advocacy is available for all to help all children speak up and have their voice heard, have their views counted. There should be automatic provision of mental health support. And we need to think about what a childhood should be. The UNCRC preamble says, in addition to the articles, a child should grow up in a family environment in an atmosphere of happiness, love, and understanding. Let's make love a right and a normal for all children, even those in alternative care, and protect the living relationships most important to children. So what can the UN do? Well, care is different all around the world, but no one's getting it quite right or we wouldn't be here. So my question to you is, what can the UN do to lead something radical and founded in love? And when will we have a treaty for the lifelong impact of alternative care? Thank you.
So, thank you very much, Megan, for sharing your experience. You have talked about the need to ensure that every child can keep a self-esteem, which I also feel very, very important. And this does not happen if you are experienced childcare. And that's a pity. That's absolutely not acceptable. Your work in ensuring that all children have the possibility to be heard in line with Article 12 of the Convention is also extremely important. And your call for a better use of money, of public investment, is absolutely crucial too. You mentioned many actors that have to be involved in improving the situation, and we don't want to see over and over new inquiries, commission and so on, who do the same finding and reach out to the same finding over and over without change in between. So thank you very much, Megan, for this experience and the great work that you are doing with your organization. Thank you for all this. We can come back to our previous speaker who appeared again. So Marcel Lemnaru from Moldova. I'm really happy that you are back and that you are with us, as I have been told. And so you have the floor for 5 minutes, if possible. Marcel?
Hello.
There we go.
Hello,
Hello Marcel.
Bună ziua, eu mă numesc Marcel, am 25 de ani, sunt din Republica Moldova. Timp de 21 de ani am trăit într-o instituție rezidențială din Republica Moldova.
Hello everyone, my name is Marcel Lemnaru. I'm 20 years old and I'm from the Republic of Moldova. For 20 years, I lived in residential institutions.
De 4 ani am fost mutat într-o locuință protejată cu alți 3 tineri. De când trăiesc în comunitate, mă simt mai protejat și mai important. Dar îmi pare rău că am trăit copilăria într-o instituție rezidențială pentru copii.
4 years ago, I moved into supported living with other 3 young people. Now, living in the community, my life has a meaning. I'm important and protected, but I lost my childhood in institutions.
Acum eu înțeleg care este diferența de cea dintre familie și cea din instituție rezidențială pentru copii.
Now I understand better the difference between family care and institutional care, and I can analyze the impact of the rights violation by the authority in institutions.
Ce eu observ acum că în țara mea nu merge bine și drepturile copiilor sunt încălcate de către autorități din Republica Moldova.
What I notice now, and I can say, is that the rights of the children with disabilities living in institution are left behind.
Eu cred că, de exemplu, eu cred că nu am avut statut legal și eu cred că toți îmi spuneau că sunt copil orfan, abandonat. Unicul document din dosarul meu este o cerere de refuz a femeii care m-a abandonat și m-a născut la maternitate.
I think that the children with disability don't have the access to the justice on equal basis. For children living in institutional care, no one is involved in establishing their legal status. For example, I did have no legal status. Everyone told me that I was an abandoned child, based only on sheet of paper written by a woman who abandoned me in the maternity.
Mie nimeni nu mi-a oferit suport juridic. Nu am mers la școală. Mi s-a încălcat dreptul la educație. Nu pot citi, nu pot scrie și îmi creează independența de către alte persoane independente.
Nobody offered me the legal support during my childhood. I was discriminated and deprived of money rights living in institutions. I didn't go to school. My rights to education has been violated. Now it's hard for me to recover 20 years. I can't read and write, which creates my dependence on other people.
Nu am o profesie în care o visez să obțin la ea. E greu să devii jurnalist, că nu am o școală bine terminată și un loc de muncă și mă simt independent în comunitate.
It's very difficult for me to get a job because I do not have the necessary knowledge and skills. It's hard to become a journalist, the job that I dream, without having educational background. Without a job, for me, it's very difficult to live independently in the community.
Pornind de la cazul meu, recomand autorităților din Republica Moldova să nu mai admită plasamente pentru copii cu nevoi speciale din Republica Moldova.
Starting from my case, I recommend to the Moldovan authorities and other states to stop new admissions of the placement of children with disability in residential institutions and to strengthen the alternative services.
În Moldova s-au închis mai multe instituții pentru copii, dar au rămas instituțiile rezidențiale pentru copii cu dizabilități din Republica Moldova.
In Moldova, the majority of institutions for children have been closed, but it remains almost the institutions where children with disability are placed. Again, this group of children is left behind.
Statul trebuie să se gândească cum solicită un statut legal.
The authority do not consult the opinion of the child when is placed in the institution. Also, the state is not acting for establishing the legal status of the children.
Vreau ca copiii cu dizabilități să se regăsească în familie, să nu mai se regăsească în instituțiile rezidențiale. Vreau ca să fie grădinice, bugete, școli, să se obțină de tratament legal și juridic.
I want the children with disabilities to be mainstreamed in all policy, in all services and budgets, in kindergarten, schools, social, health, and legal services, and enjoy unequal treatment in all aspects of the life. The children with disabilities have the right to the family and alternative care.
Eu cred că vocea copiilor cu dizabilități, în special celor din instituție, va fi auzită de către autorități și nici un copil nu va fi lipsit de drepturi la fel ca și ceilalți.
I believe that voice of the children with disability, especially those in residential institutions, will be heard and no child will be deprived of the rights, especially the right to the family.
Vă mulțumesc foarte mult pentru prezență.
Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Marcel, for your intervention and for taking the time for sharing with you your experience. It's absolutely moving what you have said and what you have shared with us. And when you say that you lost your childhood, it's absolutely moving. And we need to work and to ensure that no other children will have to say that once in their future. So this is our challenge and our duty. I wish you to be able to one day be and to make from your dream a reality and to become a journalist. And I wish to be able to read a paper that you wrote or to listen to a speech that you did. You did it so well today. I'm sure that you can make it. And please don't forget your dream and continue to fight for it. I'm sure that you can make it. So thank you for all the three speakers. You share with us such important information and experience. We need to take all this on board and ensure that we can do something with it. So I would like to forgive me for being a bit late, but for all the other speaker, but all of them will understand that it was so important to listen to those experiences. So I will ask the next speaker to be shorter, maybe to share with us a few important topics, but 3, 4, 5 ideas, but not to be too long so that we have some time for an exchange after that. I will not introduce them in a very long way. They will say what is important for them. The first speaker is Mr. Bruce Adamson, who is Ombudsperson for Children in Scotland and is the current chair of the European Network of Ombudsman Persons for Children.
Excuse me, Chair.
Yes. Yes.
Sorry, a Spanish translator, a Spanish interpreter is speaking in the English channel. A Spanish interpreter is speaking in the English channel. Please, can you move to the Spanish channel? Thank you.
So I guess that the techniques will deal with that. Yeah, I cannot do anything about it for the moment, but I give the floor now to Bruce Adamson. As chair of the ENOC, you have the word. It's a pleasure to have you with us today and to share your experience as chair of the ENOC. Please remain in a short time in the sake of the discussion further on. It's
fantastic.
Over to you, Bruce.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you, Benma. Thank you, Chair, and hello from Edinburgh. Menashe and all of the other Children's Advisory team, thank you so much for working alongside the committee to bring us together for this important event. And thank you to the brave and powerful contributions from our young human rights defenders who led this session, Sinette, Marcel, and Megan, whose leadership here in Scotland championing children's rights is really inspirational. Excellencies, delegates, we have to hear those calls for change and justice, which Sinette opened our session with. We have to deliver change. We're in a global pandemic, which has disproportionately affected children whose rights were already most at risk, particularly children in alternative care and care experienced people. And this includes historic abuses. As Sinette, Marcel, and Megan all said, we have to address the fact that childhoods are being lost. My first point would be on accountability, which goes very much to the core of human rights, because without justice, children and young people and care experienced people cannot move on with their lives. Without the acknowledgement and redress of human rights violations that have been experienced, without effective monitoring through data collection and inspections, without effective remedies through independent complaints mechanisms and access to justice, without effective corrective actions to ensure that accountability is realized. This is strongly required by our human rights framework. In Scotland, very quickly, there are two specific examples I will refer to and maybe come back to later in discussion. One focused on redress, which is our system for justice for victims of historic abuse, and one focused on system change, focusing on the point Megan made of the need to change things urgently. The care experienced young people that I speak to every day have consistently told me of feeling unloved, living in uncertainty, being moved around before they feel ready, not being listened to, not knowing and understanding their human rights and how to access them. The age of living care, poor understanding from professionals on entitlements, our low age of criminal responsibility, and concerns that we've already heard around access to education, housing, and healthcare. Care experienced young people in Scotland face multiple barriers. In relation to victims of historic abuse, there's been work going on here for the last 2 decades, which has covered a great many things. We've taken a rights-based approach, but some of the things that may be of interest are that we developed an action plan for justice for victims of historic abuse in 2014. We introduced a national confidential forum. We changed the time limits for raising human rights breaches. And we introduced a financial redress scheme for survivors of historic abuse. And there's ongoing developments. Megan's already spoken about the independent care review, so I won't talk too much about that. But the important thing was that over 5,000 people, right through from babies to adults, were involved in that process. And so it was led by Care Experience and has resulted in a 10-year implementation plan, including a focus on the resources. Again, a point that was raised earlier, that we need to resource the changes that we need to make. Broadly across ENOC, so this is a network of commissioners across the 43 members across 34 states in the Council of Europe. We've been working on this issue for a number of years. And as was said earlier, you can map this out across all of Europe and across the world. It's the same issues. And so a lack of effective engagement, a lack of access to complaint systems, legal aid supports, the lack of guardians and advocacy, the gap between law, policy, and practice, all really important. So child-centered complaints processes and redress complaint processes, along with research and data collection. There's all sorts of interesting emerging good practice from colleagues in Wales, Lithuania, in Belgium, Serbia, Ireland, Moldova, Sweden, Ukraine, Poland, Luxembourg, and my colleagues are very keen to ensure that we remain engaged in these discussions, because access to justice and accountability has to be focus of the state. The primary responsibility is on the state to ensure that duty to investigate, to prosecute individuals, and to ensure an effective remedy. And children and young people must be at the heart of that. And as independent children's rights institutions, we stand ready to continue to support you in that important work, putting you right at the heart, because children and young people have regularly told us that they're not meaningfully engaged and they need to be included more. That has to remain at the heart of our work. And we have to continue to make sure that we recognize the leadership of young human rights defenders. And we need to go back to that call that Sinead made right at the start. This isn't about pity. This is about a demand for change and for justice. Thank you.
So thank you so much, Bruce, for being with us and sharing your experience. The role, and you have emphasized it, the role of Ombudsman for Children is so important to ensure that there is a proper access to justice. In most of the country, they run helplines, they have access to institutions, they can give direct support to children. And so your role and the role of your colleagues is so important in all this regard. So thank you for the work that you are doing. Without further ado, I give the floor to Mr. Jorge Cardona. He's a former member of the CRC, so he's a former colleague of mine, and he is also a professor in a Spanish university, but he was, among others, involved in one of the main most important inquiry that the Committee on the Right of the Child has done concerning Chile So Jorge, my great pleasure to give you the floor and to listen to your great experience in that field. Over to you, Jorge.
Muchas gracias y muchas gracias por la invitación. Las cuestiones que tratamos en este grupo de trabajo no podemos desvincularlas de las que se tratan en otros grupos de trabajo de este día de debate general. En el grupo 1 están hablando ahora mismo de cómo fortalecer a las familias y las comunidades para prevenir las separaciones. Y en el grupo 2, sobre cómo abordar las necesidades de cuidado y los derechos de los niños y las niñas que se encuentran separados, sin compañía o sin recibir cuidados, en el marco de la obligación de protección y asistencia especiales que el artículo 20 de la Convención impone al Estado en estos casos. Y en este grupo de trabajo vamos a hablar de cuando todo eso fracasa y el niño, separado de su familia y en cuidado alternativo, en lugar de ser protegido, es vulnerado en sus derechos y debe acceder a la justicia para obtener una reparación. Desgraciadamente, podemos afirmar que en todos los estados se han producido esas violaciones y además se han producido con carácter grave y sistemático. Sinet Chan y Marcel Lemnaru nos han manifestado su propia experiencia de esas violaciones y se lo agradezco. Son conocidos además los escándalos de violaciones graves y sistemáticas del derecho a la vida, de abusos sexuales, de malos tratos, de falta de acceso a la educación, a la salud, a violaciones al derecho a un nivel de vida adecuado producido en todo tipo de instituciones de guarda, públicas y privadas, en Irlanda, Inglaterra, Suecia, Islandia, Noruega, Francia, España, Rumanía, Sudáfrica, Japón, Guatemala, Honduras, Chile, etcétera, etcétera, etcétera. No hay región del mundo donde no se conozcan casos de violaciones de los derechos de los niños y niñas institucionalizados, pese a la obligación del Estado de una especial protección y asistencia de esos niños. Yo querría centrar mi intervención en la primera pregunta que nos plantea el comité a este grupo. ¿Cuáles son las lecciones aprendidas a partir de las investigaciones nacionales y los esquemas de reparación relacionados con estas conocidas violaciones que deben de ser abordadas en el marco de la reforma de los sistemas de cuidado? Y la primera lección viene referida a qué procedimiento es el más idóneo para poder acceder a la justicia en estos casos, tanto por los niños como por sus familias o los adultos que crecieron en esos sistemas de cuidado. La práctica nos muestra principalmente tres tipos de procedimientos llevados a cabo: procedimientos judiciales, procedimientos administrativos y procedimientos mixtos. El procedimiento judicial podría parecer a priori el más idóneo. En él, las víctimas demandan a los tribunales la obtención de una reparación a la totalidad de los daños y sufrimientos padecidos. Pero los procesos judiciales exigen un papel activo de la víctima como demandante, actuando de forma individual. Requieren la acreditación de los daños, la determinación de los responsables y el establecimiento de la relación causal entre la acción u omisión de los responsables y los daños. Y todo eso es muy difícil para unas víctimas que se encuentran en situación de especial vulnerabilidad y clara desigualdad con el Estado. Por ello, estos mecanismos han demostrado no ser los más apropiados para responder a violaciones masivas y sistemáticas. Estamos ante violaciones de derechos humanos atribuibles al Estado, con las que el Estado ha empleado sus potestades y recursos no para proteger a sus niños, sino para agredirlos o permitir que se les agreda, incumpliendo su obligación de vigilancia, lo que obliga a que el propio Estado asuma un papel proactivo en reparar los daños y sufrimientos causados. Así, por ejemplo, en Islandia, Suecia y Noruega, fue el Parlamento el que estableció por ley un procedimiento específico ante un órgano creado por el propio Parlamento para dar acceso a la justicia con investigaciones financiadas por el propio Estado. No obstante, Esta alternativa implica que el Estado es juez y parte, lo que puede llevar también a que el acceso a la justicia y sobre todo las reparaciones no sean del todo adecuadas. Una solución intermedia fue llevada a cabo en Sudáfrica con la creación de un procedimiento arbitral específico al que poder acceder las víctimas y sus representantes de forma amigable y con un papel activo de investigación por parte del órgano arbitral independiente. Este tipo de procedimiento es posiblemente el que más puede producir. En todo caso, todo procedimiento debe basarse en el pleno respeto de la Convención y en especial de los principios básicos de la misma. Y dentro de ellos querría destacar el carácter primordial de la participación de los niños víctimas. ¿Y qué datos nos da la experiencia de las reparaciones acordadas a las víctimas de esas violaciones? Sistematizando el tipo de reparaciones que han ido siendo acordados en estos procedimientos, podemos citar, en primer lugar, la presentación de disculpas públicas por parte del Estado. Este tipo de satisfacción es de especial importancia, pues en primer lugar supone un reconocimiento de esas violaciones que devuelve dignidad a las víctimas. En segundo lugar, ayuda a la sensibilización social sobre este fenómeno y a tomar conciencia de la necesidad de erradicar este tipo de actuaciones. Y en tercer lugar, debe ir acompañado del establecimiento de medidas para garantizar la no repetición. Junto a esta satisfacción encontramos la adopción de medidas para conseguir una terapia rehabilitadora a fin de reparar en la medida de lo posible las consecuencias de las violaciones. Y junto a ello encontramos varias formas de indemnizaciones por daños, junto a indemnizaciones de carácter general, como los pagos ex gratia llevados a cabo en Islandia o Suecia, también indemnizaciones para cada caso individual, evaluando en base a la naturaleza del abuso, el impacto mismo y la duración. Pero yo querría terminar señalando que tan importante como dar acceso a la justicia y reparar a las víctimas es atacar las causas profundas y estructurales de esas violaciones. Y esa causa es principalmente el sistema de institucionalización. Por ello, todos los estados deben llevar a cabo alguno de estos procedimientos de acceso a la justicia y rendición de cuentas por dos motivos. Primero, para garantizar el derecho a la reparación de las víctimas y que éstas no queden en el olvido. Pero segundo, para llevar el tema al debate público y concienciar a la sociedad sobre lo que tratará mañana el Grupo 5, la necesidad de transformar el sistema hacia un cuidado basado en la familia y en la comunidad y erradicar la institucionalización, garantizando a todos los niños un entorno familiar adecuado. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Jorge. Es un placer de verte y de recibir tu experiencia y de compartir tu experiencia. So, yes, Jorge has told us so many important issues, also the way that we can use, the different way that you can use to try to address this problem, also the importance of reparation towards the victims, which we shouldn't forget in the future, and to ensure that it doesn't happen again. The third IE, you will tell us more about that. So, Mr. Hector Kaiwai, you have the floor, please.
Tēnā koutou katoa, tēnei te mihi ki a koutou, ko hui mai nei, e tautoko ana i tēnei kaupapa, ki ngā kaiwhakahaere, ngā mihi ki a koutou, hei whakatuotahi a tātou ki te kaupapa nei, nō reira, ki a koutou, e ngā hau wha tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Hello, and greetings from New Zealand. That was me introducing myself in our Indigenous language. I am Māori. My name is Hector Kaiwai. I am the director of Wai Research, a Indigenous community-based research centre based in Tamaki Makaurau, Aotearoa, or if I translate that for you, Auckland, New Zealand. And I shall get my colleague here to introduce himself.
Tēnā koutou katoa. My name is Joseph Andrews, and I'm really honoured and privileged to be joining you this morning in New Zealand time.
Yes. Now you have to forgive us because it is now 1:44 in the morning over here. But if there was ever an event that would get us up at 2 o'clock in the morning, it would be this one. So just very quickly, I will be talking about some of the work that I've been involved in, particularly what we call the Māori-led inquiry into Oranga Tamariki, which was a national inquiry, an Indigenous national inquiry into our state services. So very quickly, Oranga Tamariki is the Ministry of Children here based in New Zealand, and they are responsible for the well-being of our children, particularly those children that are at risk and in state care. I did notice on the agenda that it had me down as working for the Ministry of Children. I just want to make it clear that I do not. In fact, my inquiry actually looked at some of the challenges that our people, Indigenous people here in New Zealand, have had with Oranga Tamariki. Just very quickly too, so the inquiry came about through a call from our communities. So we are a community-based research group. Normally with research, it's usually very top-down. You know, somebody would choose a research question and then go and answer it. This particular inquiry came from our communities. It came from a call from our Indigenous communities here in New Zealand that then change needed to happen, that our children were getting ripped away from their families. And something needed to be done about it. So with the help of Māori leaders and communities, were able to come together and support our families. Again, another distinct part about this inquiry was that it was Indigenous led, that it didn't come from government, it actually came from our communities. And so that actually involved us going out to our communities nationally and asking our families, our Indigenous families, what do you need us to look at? What do we need to change? What are the things that are going to make a difference for you? You know, so that was quite different from any other inquiry that had been done at the time. Through that process and having an Indigenous approach, we were able to get 1,100 people engaged in that process. We're a very small country. There's only 5 million of us. So, you know, to have a number of that like that, to have families who have been through absolute abuse and trauma come to us to share their stories was an absolute privilege. You know, because again, because we had that Indigenous approach, and part of that too is we have cultural values that are about caring for our families, to make sure that they are looked after. And actually our reputation culturally is based on our ability to look after our families and people, you know. And so in fact, we not only had Indigenous families come to us, but we had non-Indigenous families come to us as well, because they felt comfortable to share their stories with us. One of the key findings, so I just want to support everybody that's talked today. It was very refreshing to hear that many of the findings and recommendations that we made in our inquiry was also shared by everybody else. Just for instance, the problems that our family had getting access to justice. You know, a lot of our families are in impoverished environments, you know, and if your child gets uplifted, you just do not have the resources to take on a multi-billion-dollar ministry, you know. So a lot of our families were just as a disadvantage, and there's a long history around the uplift of our families and the dismantling of traditional systems or care and protection systems that we had in place. Probably one of the most challenging findings that came from this was a term that we call whakapapa trauma or genealogical trauma. So part of that, in our culture, we have a very holistic view, so it was one of our family talked about, when you take that child away from mum and dad, it's not just mum and dad, you're taking them away from their culture, their identity, their history, everything that actually makes you. And we just know from the research, that, having that sense of worth, having a strong identity are so important, particularly in those formative years for our young people, so one of the key findings was that, ensuring that our people, our tamariki, our children have access to their culture and identity. One of the other very challenging findings that we had from that was around, families, who had been in abusive situations, and, had been taken away from their family. They said to us that they were able to deal with the abuse that had happened, but the one thing they were never able to get past was getting taken away from their family. So they were able to work through the abuse, and that occurred to them. So that's just one of the findings. I'm sorry that it started on a bit of a low note, but I just want you to know that some fantastic things have come from the inquiry, and really concrete things. So we've been given opportunity now there's been a devolution of programs and services back to our Indigenous communities through our government, where we've been now given the platform to reconnect our culture, and or reconnect our people with their culture, and for them to reclaim their identity, or what we like to call their mana. And that's provided us with an Indigenous approach and Indigenous platform. I'd just like to pass it over to my colleague now.
Oh yeah, kia ora. I just want to back up with Hector said, for me it's three generations.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry to intervene, but because of the time, we were able only to listen to one intervener. I'm extremely sorry for that, but we still have two intervener. But thank you so much, Hector, for sharing the work that you have done, which is certainly groundbreaking, starting from the community and ensuring that the values of the indigenous people are on the forefront of your work, and giving dignity to those people is so important. I really wish that the work that you have done will bring a lot of change, and I hope that we will be able to listen to your colleague in next session. So sorry for that again. I will introduce the fourth discussion. Mrs. Cindy Blank, Child and Family Caring Society of Canada. Hello. So without further ado, Cindy,
Thank you, Chair. I want to just pay my respects to the young people on the call, to all people who join us from different nations, and particularly to the young people who are in care. I join you from unceded Algonquin territory. I'm not going to repeat a lot of the good content shared by my previous speakers. I'm going to focus on the issue when the state party is the perpetrator of the rights violations and the access to justice issues that are particularly challenging in that environment. The suggestions I'm about to share come from the collective experiences of First Nations children. As you know, there are over 5,000 children found in unmarked graves because of the Canadian government's role in residential school, and that number will continue. There are 3 times the number of Indigenous children in child welfare care separated from their families today than there was at the height of those residential schools. And one of the key factors is that the Canadian state provides less public services to First Nations children and their families than all others. That led to litigation against the Canadian government to provide substantively equal services to keep children, Indigenous children, in their family homes as other children are able to enjoy. The problem has been is that the access to justice to bring such a complaint has been severely thwarted by the Canadian state that does not have adequate mechanisms for youth in care, for former youth in care, for children or young people in general, and for organizations working with them to bring actions that could bind the government to implement the solutions that are required to ensure the full enjoyment of children's rights, including the right of non-discrimination. So I'm going to just go through, Chair, if it's in the interest of time, because I know that you have important speakers and discussions ahead, some recommendations that flow from that. Number one is you talk about accountability, and we've worked with the Assembly of Seven Generations, an Indigenous young people's group in Canada, to understand what accountability actually means to them. What are the values of accountability? How do we make sure, as one of the other speakers said, the solutions already put forward by young people and other organizations like children's commissioners are actually implemented? So we would like to see the states are required to make special measures to support young people, including Indigenous young people in care, to access justice, to enforce their rights, including the enforcement of any rights against the state party itself. That means access to free, independent, and credible legal advice. It also would require that states take special measures to adopt the UN Declaration for the Protection of Human Rights Defenders into domestic law and provide adequate protections to ensure that young people in care, former youth in care, and their organizations are not subject to state-based retaliation in the standing up and upholding of their human rights. That should be done in concert with young people's care organizations throughout the globe. The other is that there should be a special measure taken by all state parties to ensure the participation of children and young people in systemic human rights cases brought against the state. At this point in Canada, there are, for example, special provisions in our courts for children to testify in criminal matters or in divorce matters. But in our case, there was no provision to provide for children to testify in a systemic case against the government of Canada. Those children would be subject to cross-examination by Canada that at the time had already been found responsible for retaliation in this legal case. So those provisions ought to be made. We would like to see state parties take special measures to support young people's organizations, to fully participate in all mechanisms to hold state parties accountable domestically, but also to participate in the periodic reviews of their respective countries. And that there should be some modification to the convention itself so that it understands that young people in care are also entitled to post-majority services. We know with brain science that young people's general development in their brain doesn't stop until they're at least age 25. We need to make sure that those young people in post-majority care, their rights are being upheld, and also that they have the right to be heard by the committee itself, which brings me to my final kind of recommendation in our short time we have available. And that's regarding the special measures of the committee itself, or working methods of the committee itself. I would like to see that the committee welcomes youth formerly in care to make representations to the committee during the special sessions on the actual implementation of the Convention for Children in Alternative Care, and to really be able to make representations on post-majority care, which is so critical to, for example, for the young man who spoke before me to become the journalist that he's so we all want him to be. I think he's already a journalist sharing his story here so courageously with all of us. I've certainly heard it. I would also say that where states like Canada have been found repeatedly to be racially discriminating against children in a way that removes them from their families, that they ought to be required to provide annual reports on their progress of complying with domestic legal orders to the Committee on the Rights of the Child. The Canadian government was required to end this discrimination in 2016 under Canadian courts. It welcomed the decision politically, then it didn't enforce it. We're now up to 20 non-compliance orders. But that is, it's vital that the country states be held accountable to the obligations under the Convention on the Rights of the Child. With that, I just want to recognize all the good work of youth and care organizations in Canada, the great solutions that they've put in place. And I'm just so delighted to know that my colleague Connor Lowe's will be speaking tomorrow. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, panelists.
Thank you, and also thank you for keeping it short, but you went up to the point, and that's certainly the most important. And recalling, mentioning the racial discrimination that is behind those practices, and the fact that there are decisions, but there is no enforcement, and we need mechanisms to follow up all these policies and the inquiries that have been conducted. So that's also a message that we heard, and we will take this on board, as also your suggestion of presenting an annual report to ensure that there is a follow-up. I will give the floor to the last speaker, but unfortunately we will not have time to discuss the question that have been posed in the chat. But one of the questions was linked to the COVID-19 and the consequences of the COVID-19 on the situation. But I think that in a nutshell, we know that all the difficulties that we have mentioned have been increased because of that. And the fact that in some region of the world and among others in Latin America, there is a lack of public policy for accompanying young people leaving care, and that's also the message that we already heard. And these are young people that we should not forget in the action that we put in place. Last speaker for this workshop is Mrs. Dorothea Ushar. Probably I pronounce it very badly, but she is the head of the department of the Ministry of Human Capacities Department of Child Protection and Guardianship of Hungary. We will listen to the point of view of a state who is trying to implement the provision of the CRC. So Mrs. Ushar, you have the floor, and very happy to have you with us.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you for the opportunity, and I'm honored to be here and to have the opportunity to speak. First of all, I think that the consequences of the pandemic we have been facing in the world made it even more clear that all decision makers that the creation of social security ought to be an important task for governments. And the Hungarian government puts high emphasis on promoting the upbringing of children in their birth families and bringing the life management and social problems to the surface as early as possible in order to help the families. And in order to advance the protection of children, various legislative measures were introduced, such as integrated family and child welfare services, multiple tier signaling system, and temporary family homes, or introduction of kindergarten and social school assistance. The basic goal is to make sure that children receive all the resources and services that are necessary for their physical, mental development, and this shall acquire in their earliest years possible. Over the past few years, we see that new problems were shifted to younger ages as well. For example, number of children having problems with social behavior, with mental disorders, and the kindergarten and school social assistant in public institutions in Hungary as professional social and child welfare service can provide help in these situations. Another important tool for keeping families together and help them are the temporary homes for families. And these homes accommodate parents and children to help in avoiding family separation in times of adversity. And they help enforce the right of the children to live in their families. And the We are continue to be devoted to the support of children with disabilities and their families. And there are a number of special community-based services available to help children with disabilities, to assist their physical, mental development and enforce their rights. In the Child Protection Act confirms that in the case of foster children, supported living has been named among the forms of home provision services. In case if family separation is unavoidable, the primary consideration is to provide the most appropriate care for the child, and foster care is the best alternative solution, where a foster parent provides care for children with many different needs, and it is the foster care is an alternative care option. As an alternative care option is a legislative requirement as opposed to any other form of child protection. According to our Child Protection Act regulation from 2014, a child under the age of 12 must be placed with a foster parent and not in institution, except for some cases. And as a result of this measure, foster care placement processes, including the placement of children with special needs, has been on the rise. As a result, around 86.5% among children under 12 in child protection care are placed in foster care. And in the case of children with particular special needs, this is around 70%. As a positive example, there are several measures in Hungary that serve to protect and enforce the rights of children in child protection care, such as in the case of the family separation order, the guardianship authority assigns a child protection guardian for the child, and the aim of the legal institution of the child protection guardianship is to ensure that the best interests of the child are consistently represented, regardless of the place of care, and by a single professional specialized person. It's tasked to ensure the rights of child to know his or her opinion and to inform the provider of care and the acting authority. And the child protection guardian is as a legal representative and is involved in shaping the child's future, and it's tasked to promote and help carrying the child back to his family. One of the other guarantee elements of accountability is a legal institution called of child rights representative. A child rights representative protects the rights of the child receiving child protection care, assists the child in learning about and enforcing his or her rights, and in learning about and fulfilling his or her duties. And these child rights representatives pay special attention to the protection of children with particular or special needs. To serve and protect children in institutions and in foster care, from 2018, and the investigation and treatment of child abuse cases in institutions providing child protection care and reformatories shall be carried out on the basis of the institutional maintenance and sectoral methodology approved by the Minister of Human Capacities. Another great step, as from 2019, the remit of regional child protection services was extended with a service providing investigation and therapy of neglected and abused children, especially those who have been sexually abused, and at the request of an official body facilitating of hearing and affected children. As a good practice, at the end, I would like to mention a model program for parental competence development for professionals in family and child welfare services and child protection care, which is run by the National Crime Prevention Council and the Ministry of Human Capacities with civil participators. And this multi-method development and modeling program aims to provide proven and effective tools that on the one hand, professionals can carry out their activities more effectively and motivate the family more effectively to make the necessary changes. And on the other hand, with the development of parental competence, the parent-child relationship can be more conflict-free. In the case of removing the child out of the family, the parent-child relationship can be more effective. And in the case of foster children, to their family returning to their family can be more effective. And just one on the COVID-19 topic, we had during the COVID, we had some time where the institutions were closed for a couple of weeks. We tried to help the online education with providing devices and helping families in need, that the institutional child catering was provided during the close down as well, when the schools were closed and online education was on. I think my time is up, so thank you for the opportunity and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mrs. Shar. It's absolutely important to see the commitment of state and the willingness, because this is the starting point. We need the willingness of the governments to engage in the change and to take all the responsibilities in this regard. So thank you for also presenting some of the action that you are conducting in this regard, and this will certainly be taken over in the next action that we will put in place. There are many questions that have come, but I cannot go through all of them, unfortunately. I will just would like to highlight two of them, which are in my view important. What needs to change in terms of legal policy or practice for children to be able to access justice for violation while they are in care, and not when they are out. So ensuring that something is in place during the period of when the child is in care. So we have heard some ideas in this regard, and certainly from Hungary, the fact that there is a special guardian or representative who is there to support the child. That's certainly very important, but not the only way. And the second one is the one I mentioned, the fact that in Latin America and the Caribbean countries, there is a lack of public policy for accompanying young people leaving care. And this is absolutely important. We talked about the fact we should avoid young children entering care, but we also have to ensure that there is a proper system in place to guarantee the rights of children leaving care. It's absolutely important too. So we are reaching the end of this workshop, but I would like to introduce two questions that will come that I asked the audience, and this will be done together. And the two questions that we are, so you have in the chat the link to the Mentimeter, and this is a place where you can answer to those two questions. The first question is, what is one thing that you have learned or make you think differently from this session? First question. So what have you learned and make you think differently? And the second one is, are there any additional consideration that you would like the committee to take into account? We have already many suggestions and many ideas. And so if you would like to take a few minutes now to try to give your views on those two questions, it will help us also to assess and to make an evaluation of this workshop. And we will anyway take into account everything that has been said. I see that one person is saying we can make international change together. So this is one of the main lesson learned from this workshop. Don't hesitate to add your suggestion, your ideas there. The importance of the ability to reinforce rights against state part. Reparation and redress are necessary for grave and systematic violation of children's rights. It was found to be the case in Hungary by the CRPD committee. We as caregiver, we are very strong enough to be present in the society, we can change the world as team. Strategy for addressing state parties, access to free legal aid and advice, hearing directly from children. This is, of course, a very important one. Better understanding of the situation of the children in orphanage, the orphanage tourism, which is also a big question that we have to deal with, and a few other hearing directly from the experience of children themselves is a must. We do agree with that. State willingness and efforts to provide justice is the most important. The suggestion of Cindy to adopt special measure provision by law, more strategic systemic cases against the state, is also some lesson learned. So now it's about time to close the discussion. We will keep all your suggestions here on board, and it will certainly feed our future work. If you have some other idea in consideration that you would like to share with the committee, don't hesitate to add them now. I have the feeling that we had a great list of speakers. I would like to thank them, and especially the three first ones who have been courageous enough to share their experience with us. We have been repeatedly saying that we need to listen to children and their experience. We cannot make change and try to improve the situation without listening to the children. So this is absolutely important. And we have been listening to those very moving stories that we have to take on board. So thanks again to Sinet, to Marcel, and to Megan for your contribution, and also your courage for sharing this with us. Thanks to all the other professionals for the incredible work that you are doing and for sharing your thoughts. I would like to see if my co-host, to which I haven't given much space, would like to add one or two final sentences. So Munashe, if you are still with us now, have you a few final thoughts that you would like to share, and some ideas that we need to take on board? You still have 2 minutes to do that. Please go ahead.
I just want to thank every speaker for this amazing session. I myself learned a lot about care through these speeches, and it has given me new insights and has wanted me to look more into justice and accountability when it comes to alternative care. I think the first three speakers were really brave and courageous, speaking about their experiences. It touched us all. It touched me, and I'm sure it touched everyone else in this session. And I am thankful that we are willing to make actions to make change. And I just hope that we get to see that change. A stat that really surprised me was that we're still facing the same problems since 40 years ago. And hopefully that won't happen anymore. And I just hope in the next 20 years, we will look back at 2021 and see how much change we have made and how much progress. So I just hope for the future that change will be made, and that we make great progress and strides when it comes to accountability and justice. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for attending. And I hope you have a great rest of the day of general discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Munashe, for these words and in a way a summary of what we heard. And this is the challenge that we have ahead of us. As you said, we will in 20 years' time look behind and see what progress we have been able to make and how useful was this day of general discussion, because too often we take part to a conference, day of discussion, but if there is no change afterwards, we probably lost our time. But we have heard so many good insights, some so good example, and so an experience that we really need to work together on this. And on behalf of the Committee on Right of the Child, I can tell you that this is absolutely one of our main priorities. And linked to access to justice, I should mention the fact that the committee has a very strong tool, which is the individual complaints mechanism and the inquiries, what we call the OPIC, the optional protocol on individual complaints. And this is something my call now would be to all states to ratify this. It's a tool that we give to the children to ensure that their rights may be respected. So again, thank you to all of you. Thank you for my co-chair Munashe. It was a pleasure to be in line with you for this session. And I wish you a good continuation for the rest of the conference. So please use the links that has been given to you that are probably again in the chat to join the next plenary session that will start in a few minutes, if I'm not mistaken. And thanks again. Have a great end of the day wherever you are, with great new ideas in your head. Let's put them in place. Good afternoon to all of you, and great being with you today. Oh.
Thanks, everyone. It was great. It's amazing.